grease, and dust are all achieved without using even one enamel, without solvents, oil colors, and without odors. Still, it is important to know that to paint a vehicle with acrylics requires that we change various habits in our way of painting. The drying time is a factor to keep in mind, but not the only one. The sequence of using the various techniques is also different, and some effects are achieved by the addition of the drying retarders, varnishes, and slow-drying glazes. In this DVD, we will explain all the tricks and techniques necessary to complete a tank, from the beginning to finish, where we will explain how to use all the acrylic products, from water-based colors and acrylics for airbrushes to masking fluid, cleaners, thinners, varnishes, and decal appliers. Everything necessary to achieve a model with a realistic finish that will be as perfect as any models painted with enamels and oils. We recommend that you see the entire video first and then return again to the chapters that are more important to you. But it is also important that you experiment with some of the new products you will find here, practicing with an old model before you attack a new one. Welcome and enjoy the world of acrylics. We will start by planning how to paint our model. It would be very difficult to efficiently paint a model with all the details included. That is why we must dismount the model and separate the pieces as much as possible. Although it seems like a lot of work, it is important to leave all the pieces separated, starting with the wheels, the upper hull, hatches, turret, boxes, tools, and of course the guns and tracks. We will attach all these pieces with toothpicks for easier handling so that we may paint them with comfort. Now we will prime the model. All we need is a brush to stir and mix and a cleaner to clean the airbrush, and of course the 3 primers. Gray, white, and black, that we will pour directly into our airbrush. Shake the primer well before using. And then add it directly to your airbrush. Apply the primer in fine layers so as not to swamp the surface. Make long, smooth movements and avoid going over the same place twice. The primer will leave a uniform layer, ready and resistant, which will be fundamental for painting with acrylics. The rest of the pieces will be primed separately since they previously have been attached with toothpicks. Now, mixing the color gray with black, we will recreate pre-shadows in some areas. Since acrylic colors can vary in intensity depending on the base color on which they are applied, we will take advantage of this virtue to create a more chromatic richness. We can use masking paper to protect certain areas. Now we will do the same, but with the highlights. We will use the white primer and apply it randomly on the more exposed areas. Although there are primers available in spray, working with an airbrush gives us more precision. We now begin applying the base color 71025, making sure to shake it well before pouring it directly into the airbrush. Next, we will add 20% of the color 71027 and finally 20% or more of gloss or satin varnish. We can add thinner if our mixture seems too thick. We will also add white and posterior layers to make highlights and in this way create volume. As before with the primer, we must apply smooth layers with half kilo pressure at the air compressor and at a distance of 15 or 20 centimeters from the model, and of course try to cover all the surface with the first layer. We need not worry if the color looks transparent. This is normal and that is why we have worked the primer base. Now we will create highlights adding white and satin varnish. Highlight the parts of the model most exposed to the sun or light, even using paper templates to delimit the panels. In this way, we will achieve a greater visual volume in our model, enriching the chromatic variety, especially in monochrome vehicles. With these three colors, or the equivalent in model color, and with the help of a fine brush, we will keep on highlighting, but this time the small details. We will paint the hooks, hinges, visors, and any other protruding parts with a lighter shade. We can vary the tones to give more variety, and we can also mix or add colors and even use dark colors to accentuate the shadows. The model, once finished, takes on more volume. Observe how all the details that we have painted gives more sharpness and cleanliness to the entire piece, and all the details are outstanding with greater importance. Even though there seems to be a lot of contrast, posterior effects will smooth them out. We have also painted small details such as the rivets. Before starting to paint the camouflage markings, we should take into account that we must clean the nozzle with the cleaner and paper to eliminate possible risks of dried paint in the needle. By dampening the absorbent paper with the cleaner, we will remove the remaining paint that accumulates on the tip of the airbrush. Since acrylic colors dry quickly, they tend to obstruct the needle of the airbrush after a short while, and it becomes difficult to continue painting. For this reason, we must constantly clean the nozzle and needle when we are painting camouflage patterns or fine details. To facilitate the cleaning and improve the precision of the airbrush, we must have unscrewed the exterior part of the nozzle. We must work with low pressure, little by little, and try not to cover the whole surface right away. Every time we feel that the nozzle is obstructed, we should stop and clean the needle and nozzle. Also, to help clear the airbrush, we can open the air and paint flow totally and spray on paper so that we can see if the paint flows correctly. It is time to add the decals to our tank. While we immerse them in lukewarm water, we apply decal medium with the brush to the model. We can add more medium to help move the decals on the surface until we have them placed correctly. We will remove excess liquid with absorbent paper, pressing the decal to the surface with care. Next, we apply the decal fix. We can use the same type of brush as before and moisten the surface of decal and model, allowing these to dry. As a first technique for this model, we are going to apply a wash. These washes are very extremely precise and will give depth to all the details. But we will also do general washes mixing diverse colors and applying them to larger areas. We will use the airbrush cleaner to blur the marks left by these amazing new wash products. We will start by using the dipping formula wash, and although this formula is intended for pieces to be submerged in the liquid, we will apply the product with a brush in a more precise way. This color, even though it is very dark, is ideal for almost any base color. We can dilute with water to make it softer. The acrylic washes, unlike enamels, dry fast, and we must work quickly and maintain the working area humid. This footage was filmed under 1500 watt lights and the room temperature was very high. Even so, you can see that this was no problem. Once the wash is applied in the areas with details, we will add water in the areas that must be kept clean. While everything is moist, we should blur the edges of the washes and remove the excess water with a brush and absorbent paper if necessary. With the acrylic washes, we must control the drying process till the end. While the washes dry, we should correct areas or accumulations by moistening again with water and cleaning off surplus if necessary. The advantage of this wash is that it dries quickly and the effects that we achieve are clear and realistic. We are going to do a kind of wash that is much more specific and will serve to emphasize the details and panels. For this we will use a 50-50 mixture of wash sepia 73-200 and light gray 73-202. We must let the wash accumulate around the details and rivets and try not to stain the rest of the surface. Now is when we should start to blur the borders of the washes which have already dried. Since the water will not be sufficient for this process, we will need the airbrush cleaner, which is mild enough not to harm the base color, but strong enough to soften the acrylic wash just applied. This is why it is very important to blur the washes immediately after application and not letting them dry too much. If you wish to blur the wash while still fresh, we should apply the wash on one detail only so that it will blend easier with water and cleaner. We will actually start the chipping even before we do the fading or other kinds of effects. We will use colors of model color, although we could also use the equivalents of model air. In this case, we will paint the chipping that occurs on the green camouflage, which is why we must use the base colors. Make sure that the mixture is not too thick or too watery. Take real references to guide you and start the chipping in areas that are the most exposed to wear. Always start painting first the smallest points in the areas most damaged and then advance little by little. The hatches, fenders, and small details are places easily affected by chipping. Try to do damaged areas and others which are practically new in order to create a contrast and achieve a more realistic effect. The final aspect should be subtle and not too cluttered, so as not to overdo the effect or making the chips too large. We have also chipped large areas in gray color, which interpret the original Panzer gray from the factory. It is now the moment for metal or rust chipping. Again, we will use brushes with a fine point that will give us more control and precision, because we must make the dark chips match within the lighter chipping applied before. And of course, these new dark chips should cover the areas painted with dark yellow. The chipping phase is probably the slowest and most laborious technique of all. The correct chipping of a tank can take us various days or weeks, especially if we want fineness and want to have a very damaged vehicle. But the work is worthwhile, and we must maintain concentrated at all times, since it is very easy to commit an error at any moment. We must try to keep the contrast between the different areas and avoid repeating shapes or sizes of the different chips. The small details deserve a special treatment and a lot more attention than the rest of surfaces, since these are the most closely observed by the spectators. We will paint other details using the sponge method, which is much more effective for damaged areas, although of course we will retouch with a brush. The combination of techniques is fundamental to achieve the most realism and to avoid a boring uniformity. The final result must be balanced, but at the same time irregular, making sure that each area offers something different, avoiding monotony. Areas that are very deteriorated and damaged next to others with large chips or small pitted surfaces. The chipping should be in accordance with the setting and the result of exposure to exterior aggression. Before starting with fading and rust, we will apply some previous dust or dirt in some areas. We will use colors 71, 023 and 71, 029 in equal parts, mixing these directly into the airbrush. With this mixture of earth color, we will paint subtly some areas of our model, such as below the turret, the hull, or even the fenders. Since this mix is totally matte and the base color was satin, we will be creating a contrast of dull and bright that adds a lot of realism to our model. To apply the effect of dirt to the fenders, we must first mask the zones that will remain clean. An adhesive Tamiya tape is ideal for this job, although we can use even a piece of paper. The use of masks and templates will always be useful to give more precision when we work with an airbrush, but basically it helps us create a contrast between different levels and volumes of the model. We will now again use the sepia and light gray washes, but this time to achieve different effects. At this time, we thin the mixture with some water to create a filter effect on the surface of the model. This means we must not accumulate the mixture in the details, joints, or crevices, but instead distribute the wash over the whole surface in a regular and homogeneous form. As you can see, the mixture is very transparent since it has been thinned with water. This technique gives depth and richness to the whole surface. After we have created this general fading, we will do rust effects. For this, we will use Panzer's colors 301, 302, but above all the drying retarder 70597, which once mixed with paint will slow the drying time and permit us to blend the stains as if we were working with oil color. First, make a stain in the chosen area, and then use a flat brush, clean and wet it with water to blur and blend the borders. If you want more intensity, you can repeat the process. Also, with this method we can cover much larger areas. We are going to create different earth effects using pigments, matte varnish, and acrylic thinner. We can make other human mud effects with gloss varnish, but in this particular case we will concentrate on dry mud and dust. Use an old brush to work with the pigments. Using the same products, we will see the different ways of using them, and we'll start dusting the horizontal parts of the tank. The choice of shades will depend on where our model is located, be it Africa, Europe, or Asia, but the selection of colors is not as important as knowing how to apply them on the vehicle. Deposit in a container some drops of thinner and matte varnish. This mixture will be what we will use as a fixative for the pigments. With the brush, distribute the pigment dust over the surface. You can add different colors to give the surface more depth. Then, with another brush damped with the fixing mixture, dampen the surface so that the pigment humidifies. You can repeat the process, varying the quantity of pigment to create more subtle or intense zones. And remember that if you want to correct the pigment once dry, you must omit the matte varnish and only use the thinner. To create dry mud on the hull of the tank, we must increase the quantity of pigment and the fixing mixture to agglutinate the pigment. In this case, we'll moisten the surface much more because later we will add more layers of pigment. Once all the surface is wet, we will take a brush with new quantities of pigment, which we carefully deposit on the wet areas, tapping the brush lightly with our finger so that the dust falls in the area we want. We can repeat the process once the pigment has dried, changing the shades until we achieve the desired result. It is now the turn of the wheels, and to avoid monotony, we will explain 3 different procedures of creating dust and mud. This is the basic dusting, soft and subtle. First we apply the pigment on the whole wheel, and next we add with a brush the fixing mixture, in the same way as we did with the fenders, mixing the thinner with the matte varnish. Then we let it dry. With this new example, we will see how to dirty the wheel. In this case, we will use a darker color pigment, which we will apply in a minor quantity in its center. Next, we will expand the pigment outwards from the center with a brush and the fixing mixture mentioned before. We will make radial movements, leaving darker areas in the center of the wheel and cleaner surfaces on the outside. Once dry, we will use a makeup sponge dampened in airbrush cleaner to eliminate the excess from the center of the wheel. Finally, we will do wheels with a little dry mud, which we will create in the same way as the mud on the hull. With the mixture of matte varnish and thinner, we wet the surface of the wheel, where we then drop the pigment in small amounts. To paint the tracks of a tank, be they of whatever type, metal, plastic, or resin, we will need to use a primer. Remember that we can pour the primer directly into the airbrush. By doing it this way, the resulting layer on the final details is finer, and we avoid obstructing the joints and links. Once dry, we will paint the metal part of the link that is usually more worn out from the friction with the tires. The metallic color of Model Air 71072 is perfect for this. We have painted the central area and will now protect this area with Tamiya masking tape. We will now use these two colors mixed with matte varnish to paint the rest of the tracks. The reason that we use matte varnish is because some Model Air colors may leave a slightly satin finish, and the varnish ensures that the final look will be completely matte. After removing the adhesive tape, we can see the contrast between the shiny metal and the rest of the matte track. With the sepia wash dipping formula, we will start to weather the track. Use a flat and thick brush to proceed quickly. Once dry, the final look is good enough, but now we must go to dusting the track. Again, we will use the method of dampening the pigments with a mix of thinner and matte varnish to fix them. With a mixture of the color Panther Aces 302 and model color 70-822, we will dry brush the inner and outer sides. We have achieved realistic tracks and adapted them to the rest of the vehicle in a quick and easy way. There is no doubt that acrylic colors can cover all the aspects of the process. We are going to paint the diverse details separately, masking with the tape the different parts that we will paint with metallic colors. First of all, we have painted some tools and pieces with Model Air metallic black. Next, we give highlights and shine with 71072. The gun will also be painted first with black, and once masked, we will add the highlights. This is an easy and realistic way to paint diverse types of weapons and small polished gun barrels. We will paint the rest of the details the same way we painted the tank, although it might be interesting to vary the colors so that they contrast with the vehicle. Using liquid watercolor, we will apply the washes on the small details. The liquid watercolor permits us more accuracy, and also we can diffuse them using only water. The technique of applying liquid watercolor is the same as with the washes, but instead of using the airbrush cleaner, we use water to blur the dry edges. For small details, the results can be very good, although liquid watercolor does not work as well on large surfaces. This is why this product is complementary to the washes. Other details like the shovel or pincers should be painted with the techniques used for figures, and space does not allow us to explain this here. It would be more correctly explained in a chapter on how to paint accessories than in instructions for painting the basic features of a tank. The handle of the pincers were of bakelite, which tended to take on a reddish tone. Use a fine brush to paint all the small details. For a lot of details, the Panzer Ace's colors offer us a series of prepared shades that are very adequate for painting the position lights, rubber, periscopes. This saves us the effort and time of making our own mixtures. As a last step, we must apply gloss varnish for a final shine. The grease or spilled oil is a very important part in any vehicle, but especially in tanks. With the mix of 73-200, 70-822, and gloss or satin varnish, we will paint all the small stains and drops that appear around the engine or turret. We should start diluting the mixture to make grease older and slowly overlap layers. Watch the form and size of the layers, but especially where to put them. Although it seems easy, we can ruin our model if we do not do it with care, artistry, and credibility. To understand the appearance of spilled oil, you can use real garages and mechanic workshops as a reference. Spilled oil and grease is a very realistic detail, but we must be careful if we do not want to ruin our tank. The fallen vegetation on the tanks is another detail that we should pay attention to as we finish our model. We will glue different paper leaves with matte varnish. Various commercial brands offer this product nowadays. A few drops of matte varnish will be the perfect glue for fixing the leaves to the surface of the model. Well, maybe some will resist, but more than 40 leaves have been put on this panzer too. Finally, we will add branches or small vegetable fibers, fixing them to the tank with the same matte varnish. In the end, we have managed to complete the whole tank with all the effects of aging, using only water-soluble products, avoiding bad odors in our home, and helping to preserve our health and surroundings. An example of all that can be done with acrylics. Welcome and enjoy the world of 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 acrylics. With the sepia wash, with the sepia wash. This model has been painted exclusively with acrylic paints. We must work with low pressure. We must work with low pressure. We must work with low pressure, little by little, and try not to cover the whole surface right away. We must work with low pressure. Welcome and enjoy the world of acrylics. This model has been painted exclusively with acrylic paints. Thank you for following us until here, but now it